Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast. We have a very special guest today. We have Rafi Sands over from Tandem. You may have heard of the company or Rafi in previous newsletters. I think we first mentioned him around 500 days ago in the newsletter, where we introduced this concept that they were working on and some of the ideas behind it. But to dive further into the company, what they're up to, what makes them different in the FlexSpace industry, but also to celebrate their recent funding round, Rafi, let's jump over to you. How are you and how is the Tandem team doing today?
Yeah, we're doing great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic to have you here. And thanks again for contributing to the last undercurrents we did diving into fractional offices. But before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit more about what is Tandem today?
Yeah, so we originally started with this concept of fractional offices. There were a lot of companies that were coming out of COVID that were really put in this dilemma where they had an office that was larger than they could rationalize, given they had shifted to hybrid work schedules 2-3 days a week. But they also didn't want to downsize because they were worried that if they went to a smaller space, it would be even harder to get people into the space. And so a lot of them during COVID, their CEOs and leadership said, hey, why don't we go find a partner company that can take part of the office and we can share conference rooms? And the challenges that those companies ran into is that no one would help them, that it was impossible to find a perfect match. It was difficult to figure out how to price the space, how to do legal, how to figure out the sharing arrangements. So that was our sort of entry point product. We've grown quite a bit. We're now live in New York City and San Francisco, and we've expanded actually far beyond fractional offices. We do a lot of private spaces now, really focused on helping companies find space on short lease terms, flexible arrangements.
I love that. So if I had to ask you, put you on the spot, given the fact that this is a co-working publication and media channel, where do you sit in the FlexSpace industry? Are you or are you not a co-working platform?
We're not a co-working platform. We don't do daily rentals. We don't do individual seats. We don't do hourly. This isn't about maximum individual flexibility. Our core customer is not what I think the core customer of most co-working is, which is more freelancers, super small businesses. Instead, we serve a different niche. We serve a category of younger, rapidly growing, often well-funded companies that need office flexibility. So you can imagine a 10-person team that's raised some venture money and is ready for an office space, but not quite ready for a 5-year office lease, not ready to hire an office manager and manage build outs and construction and TIs and furniture. That's where we come in.
That's it. That's really interesting. So before we dive into how that all works, you did mention a little bit of how it all started. I believe you guys spun out of Stanford, a project there. Is that correct? Where you're doing kind of the matching part of it, right? How do you match the perfect offices? Is that where you guys started the concept?
That's right. We were actually a team of 5 of us working with Nick Bloom at Stanford. And I was sitting down with Nick in the summer, I think it was fall of 2021 or early 2022. And Nick was showing me data from Castle on office key card swipes. And Nick had become kind of the voice of data on work from home and remote work when journalists and the media had really no one else to turn to. And he basically painted a picture. He said, look, the future of physical space is going to be very different. He said to me, if you look at what's happened in retail, in e-commerce, in travel and dining, these are all things that were drastically affected by the COVID shutdown.
Yep.
And yet by the end of 2021, you could see the trajectories of all of those industries actually returning right back to where they had been. And when you looked at office attendance, it wasn't the same. We had started to see the beginning of what has now become crystal clear, which is a flatlining of office attendance. And we started off with this concept right around matchmaking and just toying with ideas. And that one seemed to have some legs.
That's cool. And then you, as you said, you went into like this idea of fractional offices, and that's who created the supply that you then listed and then matched around. But tell me a little bit more about how it works today. Who provides the space that is listed on your platform?
Yeah, so we work both with landlords who have space that they want to offer on flexible lease terms. We define that as anything under 24 months, which is crazy that a year and a half, 2 years is considered flexible, but it
Flexible.
actually is in the traditional office market. Our sweet spot is really 6 months, 1 year lease terms. But we also work with tenants, with companies who have extra space, and that could be a fractional office, meaning two companies that share a space together. We've done a lot of those. And it could also be a full space takeover. But our whole thesis is that the traditional marketing and leasing process doesn't work when you take lease terms down to 6 months or 1 year. And that's where we're building tech around.
Love that. And so you say it doesn't work. Is that mostly just because of the fact that the traditional brokerage isn't incentivized commission wise to fill short-term leases? Is that kind of the gap that you're seeing, or is it just the fact that they don't really want to do those deals?
Yeah, and both incentives are a lot of this, but it's really about the workload. Where if you go out and ask a broker to look for an office space, the workload is pretty similar, whether it's a 1 year lease or a 5 year lease. And the trends that we've seen in the industry are shorter lease terms, are smaller spaces, and are more shared spaces and amenities. And so this is really looking at the office leasing process, which frankly, a lot of folks have always pointed out has been broken. That
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense that today where I'm sitting in San Francisco, I could go on Zillow and find a $5 million home and put in an offer tomorrow. But if I wanted to find an office space that is $10,000 a month, it would take me 3 to 6 months to go through that process. And there would be a half dozen or more vendors involved with it, including not just your brokers and designers, but furniture, movers, janitorial, access control, legal, accounting. It's a huge pain.
Mhm. Yes, you bring up some very valid points, and also it also opens up a whole bunch of questions where I'm like, okay, how does this work? I have an available office. Who is responsible for implementing the tech, the access control, the fit out? Is that something that Tandem handles, or is it something that I have to do under advisement? Like, how does that work if I've just got this shell of a space that I want to put on Tandem?
Yeah. So we're actually seeing the trend in the industry is landlords increasingly are building out spaces. They're building what's often called spec suites, ready to go, plug and play, furnished. And where they are struggling most is with the lease transaction and the marketing of the space itself. And
Hmm.
that's because landlords are a lot better at working with their property management and operations folks than we are. But if you own a single building or two buildings in a city like New York City or San Francisco, the ability to get distribution to reach the end consumer is nearly impossible.
Hmm.
And we've seen that turn up because what we're seeing is direct to consumer ads from landlords who are offering short-term small spaces. That's a crazy phenomenon. It tells you a lot of what is broken in this industry
Hmm.
because the cost per click on a direct to consumer Instagram or LinkedIn ad is so high that in an industry as fragmented as commercial real estate, the
Hmm.
chance that the person viewing that ad is actually a match for that space is so low, it simply doesn't work. And that's why there really is need for a marketplace. And we would consider ourselves really a marketplace with a services software layer. And
Hmm.
so our role really is coming in and helping a landlord or a company that has extra space package up their space. So what does that mean exactly? It means that they don't necessarily know what demand wants, but we do. We have the
Hmm.
market data. We can tell them, they can give us a floor plan and we can say, here are the ABC options that you should offer backed in this data. Here's the price point that you should offer it at. Here is how to pre-vet a lease agreement so we don't have to go through weeks and months of legal review. Here's how to preset a price. Customers like clear, transparent pricing. That's the age that we live in today.
Hmm.
Those are the kind of things that we get involved.
That's really interesting. And so, how does the business model work? I know I'm digging really deep into all things Tandem here. Is it a commission structure like other aggregator platforms, or is it a service fee? Like, how does it work for the business?
Yeah, so we see ourselves as the application layer for office leasing, specifically short-term flexible leasing. What does it mean? It means that the customer finds a space through our platform They get their rent payments are done through our platform. They get insurance on the space through our platform. They can arrange a furniture vendor through our platform. And so the way that we make money today is mostly through a fee that we take on rent as it's paid. You can think of
Mhm.
it like Airbnb. But the major disruption from how brokerage works is the way brokerage works is that brokers get a flat commission that is paid on the total contract value of a lease upfront.
Mhm.
Meaning if you sign a 5-year lease, the entire 5-year commission is paid by move-in. And that's
Yep.
very different than our model where the fee is taken on a recurring basis. It creates a very different incentive structure where we're actually focused on delivering value throughout the life cycle of the tenant in the space.
That's interesting. And are you monetizing the insurance and the other elements as well, or is it add-ons that you've bundled in Airbnb?
Yeah, we don't take a cut on any other services. Where we see ourselves valuable is really as a coordinator. We're not going to be as good at furniture installation as the guys that do furniture installation, which it
Yep.
sounds obvious, but that's different than we work and a lot of operators of space that try to do it all. What we
Yep.
can be good at is we can be good at knowing the vendors and vetting the vendors and knowing their processes and timelines. So
Mm.
we're just getting ready to launch a partnership actually with a janitorial services provider where we can give them, I think it's 11 different data fields from a listing on our marketplace, and they can give us an instant quote. And that's a big
That's
deal
cool.
because it means
Yep.
you can come to a listing page and see a space and you can choose your janitorial package. You can choose your internet bandwidth. You can choose the furniture that you want to have in the space and you can see how long it's going to take to move in. And we also have attorneys that we can partner with where if you do need an extra legal review on top of a guarantee that we can provide on the lease itself, that's simply an add on.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. And given the fact we've chatted a few times in the past, and I always love kind of spitballing the ideas. There's just so many additional services you could do, whether it's concierge food delivery, fruit, all the things that co-working spaces traditionally offer. I don't see why an OS like yourselves couldn't do that. My question for you though is, since there are so many co-working spaces with existing offices that are sent or leased out to these size teams at these types of leases, what's the one thing that's challenging for you to work with more co-working spaces directly as opposed to directly with landlords?
Yeah, I think the word co-working itself has a lot of baggage and can mean a lot of different things to different folks. You have on the one hand national brands like WeWork that are everywhere and do everything, and you get these day passes that people from all over the world can be coming in and out to whenever they want and booking meeting rooms. And then you have super small single site boutique co-working centers and then you have other spaces that you could call co-working, but are simply a collection of private offices.
Mhm.
And is there a front desk person? Are there snacks provided? What really is the line between a what the original word co-working, I think was a you probably know this better than me, but it was I think it was a bohemian San Francisco, or maybe it came out of Berlin, I
Yep.
think, freelancers that wanted to hang
Mhm.
out and be with each other. And so there is a lot more that is, I think, closely adjacent to that definition of co-working that's not quite co-working. We do work with operators from time to time, but I would say very clearly we're not a co-working aggregator. There are a lot of companies out there that are online websites that an individual can go on and say, "Oh, today I want to work from this office, and tomorrow I'm going to work from that office." That's a very different business, and that's not what we do.
That is very interesting. And yeah, given my day job working and building kind of integrations between all the platforms, I probably have more insight into what the different aggregators do offer and don't offer. So it's a really interesting niche that you're carving. That's what we call co-working adjacent, right? It's there. I think there's an opportunity for the right types of spaces to offer their offices, maybe through a platform like yours, but also they have to be aware about when they're pitching companies of the same size, where else are they looking? Are they looking at a service like yours? And where is it when is it a better time to use
Mhm,
Tandem versus
mhm,
co-working, right? And we're definitely seeing these kind of deals where someone joins the studio at Tishman Spire, or they join a Tishman building because they also have spillover space at the studio, or at Heinz, or at the Square, or things like that. So it's just a really interesting kind of congregation now between A, as you mentioned, what is co-working, and B, how do you structure these deals that need different flex products? Because I'm assuming that's one of the competitive advantages if we had to play devil's advocate from a co-working network compared to Tandem is they can go to multiple locations as they travel, whereas that's not really a feature of Tandem, but it's a completely different subset, right?
Yeah, let's talk about the customer really and what they
Mhm.
want. Because there are individuals out there, tend to be either individuals that work for themselves, or they could be working for a big company that, say, signed up the company for liquid space
Mhm.
or Upflex. And that the need they're solving for is maximum flexibility. That is on the far end of the spectrum of I live in Brooklyn, so I want to work in at this Brooklyn location, but then on Thursday nights I stay with a family member uptown, so I want to be able to work in this location on Fridays. And that use case of maximum flexibility is a little different than what our customer looks for. And what I would also argue the probably the core customer at Tishman Studios, for example, is not quite about maximum flexibility. What they're looking for is a flexible and easy lease arrangement, which is different than the individual flexibility to come in and out on their own choosing each
Mhm.
day. And the trade-offs there, I think really come down to individual flexibility versus group coordination. Where
Yep.
if you put yourself in the minds of a team or a company, on the one hand, if you give every employee maximum flexibility, they can choose to come and go wherever they want. On the other hand, you sacrifice the team being together,
Mhm.
which is what a lot of folks are looking for in office space. And so we cater more to that side of the spectrum around group and having a single place that they can go to, but where they can do it on a more flexible lease arrangement than the traditional market would facilitate.
Got it. So for what I'm hearing, and just correct me if I'm wrong, you're less competing with that hyper flexible network type co-working play and more competing with the traditional. Is that, would you say that is more accurate than saying that you're competing with co-working spaces?
I would argue there's a new category emerging here in the middle. And I'm glad you mentioned Tishman Studios because I think that's a great example of this new category. Look at Studios by Tishman. It is plug and play, ready to go, private offices, and also some shared spaces. I believe they have a little bit of co-working, but it's the co-working open area. It's actually not the core of their product. And if you look at how Tishman has built studios, they've done it all in house.
Mhm.
They have built a marketing and distribution and leasing team that manages and runs Tishman Studios in house, and
Yep.
that's because it's difficult for brokers to market and lease that type of space. Where we come in is that most landlords don't have the in-house resourcing that Tishman Spire has. Most landlords are very small and their
Mhm.
resourcing doesn't allow them to do that kind of thing. We are building the marketing, leasing, distribution platform for all the other landlords out there that want to offer something like Tishman Studios.
Love that. And thank you for clarifying. I'm just always excited about where everything fits into this puzzle of flex, right? It's definitely a fascinating positioning that you're going after and core market. You're starting to win more and more great deals. I see the logos on your site. I'm like, I know half of these companies and they're using your spaces, which is my next question to you is before we dive into YC funding, San Francisco's opinion on co-working, which sounds negative. Tell me more about what does the technology look like? We've connected a few times on LinkedIn about your theories around AI, your implementation, what you're building as an engine. How far are you down the AI arms race? Is there any AI features that we should talk about or anything like that?
Yeah, there's really two components to our product. One of them is AI, and I'll talk about that in a second. But let me give you the core layer that comes before AI. And that is really about packaging up space in a way that is discreet enough to allow it to be marketed and sold more easily. What does that mean exactly? It means that when you go get a 1 year office lease with a total lease value, we had a customer last week. He's going to spend $50,000 on the total value of this lease contract over 1 year. So not a big contract. And he has to go hire an attorney And the attorney is going to charge him $5,000 to $10,000 to review the lease on a contract that's $50,000. And he has to do that because the landlord sent him a 38-page document for this $50,000 lease. And he's not looking to win any special favors here, but he wants to make sure that there's nothing in that document that could suddenly leave him on the hook for $500,000 in HVAC damages just because he happened to be in the space at the wrong time. And so the reason I bring up this example is that you can throw AI into this mix, but before you do that, you actually need to build the foundational layer where actually we can standardize lease documents. We can have a standard form, or at least a standard process through which we evaluate, diligence, score lease documents that are shared with us from landlords. And then once you have that, where the AI piece really comes in is about customer experience. When you're looking for an office space, even if you're a 10, 15 person company, this is a big decision. This is a big decision because this is the place where your company's culture is built. This is the place where your team comes together, and it matters. It matters what space you pick and where that space is. And because of the intensity of feelings involved in the office search process, our thesis is that the consumer, the buyer, wants some level of white glove experience. That's really the core value of what brokers provide is, don't worry, let me help you, talk you through this. We can set your expectations and answer questions throughout the process as they come up. And so what we are building is an AI leasing platform that delivers the same level of white glove quality experience that you would expect if you're looking for a 10-year office lease with the best broker in town, but for an office lease that is 6 months or 1 year. And that starts with what we've built so far is mainly focused on browse, shop, compare, and recommendation. So we can take a little bit of information about your company and we can recommend spaces algorithmically using the LLMs that we're connected to that can deliver a better recommendation than even a human being.
That's really cool. I love the fact you started with kind of the systems and the processes and obviously the data, because without that, you can't build AI. When we see it so many times, people are like, oh, we have these data silos, throw an AI in there. And you're like, but nothing map. So I love the fact you started there. And obviously a lot of other folks love the way you're approaching this. A couple of months ago, you guys got into YC. I think that was 196 days ago, according to our newsletter. Tell me a little bit more about that process. Right now, all of YC is essentially AI companies, which is why I started with your AI question, but it's also highly scalable software companies, whereas you are still in the office space market, even though you're a tech company. How did that feel being in YC, as a founder, as a first-time YC founder, but also as being from someone who's from the unsexy market of office?
This is all a question of framing. It's interesting because we actually took a step forward before, then we took a step backward, if you want to put it that way. One of our initial ideas when we were working with Nick Bloom at Stanford was, let's build an agent for agents. Meaning, let's build an AI agent for office brokers. Because you look at the tasks that they do every day, which is surveying spaces and sending back and forth emails to schedule tours and answering questions that are based on a text lease document. The use case seems so obvious. And as we started to explore that, what we discovered is a market that is undergoing real transformation. And that's the market that you cover on this podcast and in your newsletter. And we made the decision at that point, actually, it would be a bigger opportunity for us to go after this new category, the Tishman Studios kind of category we were just talking about, and build tooling that enables us to take it big rather than building an agent for those that exist already. And the analog to this is mobile is what powered Uber. That is what made Uber take off. But Uber didn't decide to build a mobile system for taxi drivers. They could have said, we're going to build an on-demand booking platform and we're going to sell it to Yellow Taxi and they're going to give it to all their drivers and it's going to make it way easier. No, they actually decided to go directly to the consumer and build the marketplace themselves because they saw a bigger opportunity there. And what's been fascinating with this moment in AI is it's actually, I think we've seen the same thing happening across industries. And in YC, it's been fascinating to see the number of companies building around legal, around accounting, consulting, professional services. And every one of those companies is coming to this decision point where they say, hey, do we build for the existing providers, or do we go after a subset of the market actually owning the customer end to end?
That is really interesting. And is it there
Yep.
where the term co-working seems like a dirty word, or is that just generally how San Francisco sees co-working right now?
Oh, WeWork did us no favors. I actually take that back. WeWork paved the way, of change in this industry. But man, they left a really harsh message behind. And the unfortunate reality is that most folks who heard about the WeWork story, they didn't read beneath the fold. They didn't read that WeWork actually had incredible demand for their product, that
Mhm.
Knotel blew up with demand for their product. And the problem really was that we were living in a different era of supply and demand before
Mhm.
2020. And the only way WeWork could supply the product that they were selling was through some financial bets that were not aligned with the incentives of their investors, which were tech
Mhm.
investors, and the whole thing collapsed alongside a whole lot more that happened inside the company that we all know about. But it definitely it's been really interesting building in a huge, enormous market that I think has been really neglected.
Absolutely. And yeah, if only there was a newsletter of some sort that could have highlighted more of what was actually happening in industry. But um, let's finish with your great news. So you were in the newsletter, I think 2 weeks ago, last week actually, talking about your latest fundraising round. You raised $6.1 million for a bunch of really awesome investors. Tell us what that's going towards and what we can expect next from Tandem.
Yeah, so two things really. Primary source where this funding is going toward is to tech investment. We could decide to go really big, really fast by simply hiring a bunch of operators, and we would make the mistake of accidentally building either an operator ourselves, like a flex operator, like a WeWork, or a brokerage firm, neither of which are the companies that we are trying to build. And so we find it critical that at this juncture, at the point we're at, we're still young, we're still very early, but we've seen some really incredible growth to double down and focus on tech. And more than half of our team are engineers right now, building out that core application layer. And then we're starting to build a lot more in the AI space, as you alluded to. But that's been really what the funding has been used for. The second thing is that we started to branch out, and we've just launched private spaces. And that's come in the last few months, where again, we started with this fractional office sharing concept. We saw so much demand for that. And we started to see a lot of companies that also want the same ease and flexibility that we provided with shared spaces in spaces of their own. That means you can go online and you can see a private office that's available on a 6-month or 1-year lease. You can see what the price is. You can book a tour on your own schedule, and you can know exactly how long it's going to take you to get moved into that space and sell.
That sounds great, man. Rafi, I'm excited for you. I'm excited for the whole team. Congratulations again. Thank you for joining us here on the podcast and sharing your story. If folks wanted to reach out to you, what's the best place to do?
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn or an email.
Amazing. Thanks again, Rafi, and here's to your continued success.
Thank you so much, Hector. Thanks for having me.